Fame, perfection, obsession. In old Hollywood, some actors didn't just play the part, they lived it. On dusty backlots and sound stages where dreams were manufactured under blazing studio lights, legends pushed their minds and bodies past reason, all for a few precious minutes of film that would live forever. This is not a story about memorizing lines or hitting your mark. This is about actors who blurred the line between performance and reality so completely that directors, crew members, and co-stars couldn't tell where the character ended and the person began. These classic Hollywood icons transformed method acting into something darker, stranger, and more obsessive than anyone had imagined possible. What you're about to discover are 14 behind-the-scenes stories that reveal the shocking truth about iconic performances. These weren't just dedicated professionals showing up to work. These were artists willing to risk their health, their sanity, and sometimes their careers for a single role. They isolated themselves from loved ones, altered their bodies beyond recognition, and dove so deep into emotional extremes that some never fully resurfaced. From Marlon Brando living in a wheelchair among wounded veterans to Robert De Niro gaining 60 pounds and actually driving New York taxis, these acting obsessions built a mythology of what it means to be serious about your craft. Some stayed in character for months. Others rewired their psychology to access emotions most people spend their lives avoiding. A few took their preparation to places that shocked even battle-hardened Hollywood professionals. The old studios called it method acting. Critics called it genius or madness, depending on the day. But for these film legends, it was something more primal. The hunger to transform, to disappear into someone else's skin, to create performances so authentic that audiences would forget they were watching actors at all. This was a golden age of cinema, when the pursuit of perfection knew no limits, and celebrity stories from behind the scenes were stranger than any script. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on these insane dedication rituals. You'll witness the shocking transformations, the on-set breakdowns, and performances that change movies forever. Because in classic Hollywood, the difference between a good actor and a legend wasn't talent. It was how far you were willing to go. Marlon Brando, the unpredictable genius. Before Marlon Brando became synonymous with method acting rebellion, he made a decision that would redefine what preparation meant in Hollywood. For his film debut in The Men in 1950, playing a paralyzed war veteran named Ken Willisek, Brando didn't just research the role. He moved into a Veterans Administration hospital and lived among paraplegic veterans for weeks, refusing to leave his wheelchair even between takes. This wasn't a publicity stunt. Brando arrived at the Birmingham VA hospital and committed to experiencing every aspect of his character's reality. He learned how to transfer his body from bed to chair, how wheelchair users navigate doorways, how they position their hands and adjust their sight lines. The stainless steel chair became an extension of his body. Crew members reported hearing the squeak of wheels against tile as Brando rolled to his blocking marks. The scrape of metal echoing through institutional corridors painted that particular shade of government green. What shocked directors and fellow actors wasn't just a physical accuracy. It was a psychological transformation. Brando stayed in the chair during lunch breaks. He maintained the posture, the stillness in his torso, the particular way his character would hold tension in his shoulders. Veterans on the ward coached him on the small, invisible adjustments that able-bodied actors never consider. The result was a debut performance critics called shockingly real and disturbingly authentic. The film industry had never seen anything like it. Here was an actor who refused comfort, rejected shortcuts, and insisted that truth required sacrifice. Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire would follow, with Brando embodying the brutish character's mannerisms offset, speaking in his growl, wearing his torn t-shirts to rehearsals. Directors learned quickly that working with Brando meant accepting his process. The long silences, the improvised lines that no one expected, the total immersion that made him unpredictable and electric. This approach launched a revolution. Suddenly, the old Hollywood technique of just hit your mark and say your lines felt hollow. Brando proved that living the role created performances that burned through the screen. Other actors started measuring their own dedication against the standard. The unpredictable genius had shown them all how deep you could go, and Hollywood would never be the same. James Dean, the rebel who never turned it off. James Dean didn't just play troubled youth. He channeled something raw and unfiltered that made his co-stars uncomfortable. On the sets of East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant, Dean stayed locked in emotional character between takes, isolating himself from crew members, pacing alone, and refusing to break the psychological state his scenes required. This wasn't the friendly professionalism of classic Hollywood. This was something new, intense, and unsettling. Director Elia Kazan noticed it first during East of Eden. Dean would arrive on set already carrying the weight of Cal Trask's desperate need for his father's approval. Between takes, instead of joking with the crew or grabbing coffee, Dean sat apart, his face holding the character's anguish. He wouldn't make eye contact. He barely spoke. When cameras rolled again, there was no getting into character. He was already there, vibrating with genuine emotion that came from somewhere deep and unreachable. For the iconic scene where Cal offers his father money and gets rejected, Dean's reaction wasn't scripted. It was real grief pouring out of him. He'd spent hours before filming accessing memories of abandonment, channeling real anger and hurt for realism. Co-star Raymond Massey, trained in the old-school style, found Dean's intensity exhausting. But Kazan understood. This was an actor mining his own psychological depths for gold. The pattern continued on Rebel Without a Cause. Dean stayed moody and withdrawn during the famous planetarium scenes, keeping his emotional temperature high for days. He fought with director Nicholas Ray, pushed back against scripts, and improvised lines that captured teenage rage better than any writer could. The switchblade scene, the police station breakdown, these weren't performances. They were controlled explosions from an actor who dissolved the barrier between self and role. Hollywood whispered about Dean's dangerous dedication to his craft. Some called it genius. Others worried about an actor who seemed unable to turn it off. At just 24, Dean had created 3 performances that defined youthful rebellion for generations. But the cost was visible in his eyes, the exhaustion of never resting, never being just James Dean again. He carried his characters like ghosts, and they haunted him between action and cut. Montgomery Clift, the man who became his roles. Montgomery Clift approached acting with perfectionism that bordered on obsession. While other stars relied on charisma and good looks, Clift spent days, sometimes weeks, mimicking his character's smallest habits. Their walk, their speech patterns, the way they held a cigarette or answered a question. For From Here to Eternity, playing the troubled Private Pruitt, Clift didn't just learn to box and play the bugle. He studied the psychology of a man trapped between principles and survival until he could think like Pruitt without trying. On set, directors watched Clift disappear into his preparation. He'd arrive hours early to rehearse alone, working through every possible emotional nuance. For A Place in the Sun, where he played a working-class man seduced by wealth and beauty, Clift examined every gesture George Eastman would make. The self-consciousness of a poor boy in rich spaces, the hunger behind polite conversation, the desperation disguised as ambition. He walked differently as George. He held his shoulders differently. His entire physical presence shifted. The psychological depth Clift brought to his roles shocked audiences used to more theatrical performances. In The Heiress, his character's calculated charm required Clift to maintain 2 emotional tracks simultaneously, the sincere surface and the calculating interior. Crew members reported that Clift would stay in this divided state throughout filming days, exhausting himself to keep both layers authentic. Co-star Olivia de Havilland marveled at how Clift could access such complex emotional states on command, yet worried about what it cost him. What separated Clift from other method actors was his emphasis on emotional realism over physical extremes. He didn't starve himself or refuse to bathe. Instead, he rewired his psychological responses, training himself to feel what his characters felt when specific lines were spoken or situations unfolded. This internal method created performances of devastating subtlety, a tear forming before the camera noticed, a voice crack that seemed to surprise even Clift himself. Hollywood recognized his genius with 4 Academy Award nominations before he turned 35. But those who worked with Clift saw the toll. Each role left emotional residue he couldn't quite shake. He became his character so completely that Montgomery Clift himself seemed to fade, replaced by the ghosts of troubled men who lived inside his performance. Bette Davis, eyes that burned through the screen. Bette Davis didn't wait for directors to tell her how to play a role. She seized total control. Known for research so obsessive it bordered on intimidating, Davis approached each character as a complete transformation project. She studied facial tics, practiced specific gestures for weeks, mastered the exact smoking style her character would use, and demanded that every physical detail serve the performance. On her sets, Davis was the unquestioned authority on who her character was and how she should move through space. For All About Eve, Davis didn't just play the aging actress Margot Channing. She lived inside the terror of fading relevance. She researched how Broadway stars held themselves at parties, the particular blend of confidence and fear in their laughter, the way they commanded rooms while secretly scanning for younger threats. Davis rehearsed Margot's cigarette technique until the gesture became iconic. The sharp exhale, the dismissive wave, the way she stabbed the air with her lit cigarette to punctuate points. But her most shocking transformation came in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. In 1962, Davis designed and applied her own makeup for the deranged former child star. Cracked pancake foundation caked on like plaster, clumpy mascara, lipstick slashed across her mouth with no regard for accuracy. When she arrived on set camera ready, crew members actually winced. There was no vanity, no compromise. This was a woman willing to make herself grotesque for truth. Davis insisted that Baby Jane Hudson would never properly clean her face, so she kept a chalky, flaking texture throughout shooting. The smell of old powder and cheap makeup became part of her process. Co-star Joan Crawford, committed to glamour even in horror, was reportedly disturbed by how far Davis took the physical degradation. But Davis understood something crucial. Jane's arrested development and decay had to be visible in every frame. The studio worried audiences wouldn't accept Davis looking so deliberately ugly, but the performance became legendary. Davis proved that her eyes, those famously intense eyes that could burn through the screen, mattered more than conventional beauty. She taught a generation of actresses that truth required courage, that transformation meant abandoning safety. In classic Hollywood, where beauty was currency, Bette Davis showed that power came from fearlessness. Vivien Leigh, becoming Scarlett, losing herself. Vivien Leigh's immersion into Scarlett O'Hara for Gone with the Wind wasn't just preparation, it was possession. Director Victor Fleming watched as the British actress erased herself and became the Southern belle so completely that her own accent disappeared between takes. For nearly 5 months of brutal shooting, Leigh maintained Scarlett's emotional volatility on and off camera, the psychological strain evident in her increasingly fragile state as production dragged on. Leigh's preparation was relentless. She studied every detail of antebellum Southern culture, practiced the accent until it became automatic, and accessed emotional extremes that left her drained between scenes. The famous As God Is My Witness scene required Leigh to summon such desperate determination that she barely spoke afterward, sitting alone and trembling while crew reset. Co-stars reported that Leigh would sometimes remain in Scarlett's headspace during breaks, her face holding that particular blend of determination and desperation that defined the character. But it was A Streetcar Named Desire in 1951 that revealed the dangerous cost of Leigh's immersive method. Playing Blanche DuBois, a woman descending into delusion, Leigh accessed such raw psychological territory that the line between actress and character blurred. She prepared through sleepless nights, studying the fragility of denial, the terror of facing unwanted truths. Director Elia Kazan grew concerned when Leigh began showing Blanche's symptoms off camera. The nervous laughter, the compulsive lying, the desperate need for gentleness in a harsh world. The rape scene with Marlon Brando required emotional preparation so intense that Leigh collapsed after filming, shaking and unable to speak. Brando himself was shaken by the authenticity of her terror. Leigh had gone somewhere most actors couldn't access, diving into Blanche's breakdown with such commitment that she brought back something real and disturbing. The Academy Award that followed felt both like recognition and warning. Those closest to Leigh saw how the roles changed her. Each character left psychological fingerprints she couldn't fully erase. The woman who became Scarlett and Blanche so convincingly paid a price that Hollywood whispered about but never fully acknowledged. Her performances remain masterclasses in emotional commitment and cautionary tales about how far immersion can take you before you can't find your way back. Marlene Dietrich, perfection in every frame. Marlene Dietrich didn't believe in spontaneity. She believed in control. Every frame of film had to meet her exacting standards. The German-born icon demanded exact lighting that sculpted her face like a painting, spent hours rehearsing expressions in mirrors, and insisted on costume precision down to the millimeter. On sets across Hollywood, lighting crews learned that working with Dietrich meant patient craftsmanship, because she would not accept good enough when perfection was possible. Dietrich's obsession with her image bordered on scientific. She studied how light hit her cheekbones from different angles, mapped the shadows that enhanced her mystique, and worked with cinematographers like Joseph von Sternberg to create the iconic Dietrich light, a specific setup that became her signature. Before every take, she'd check herself in a handheld mirror, adjusting not just makeup but the actual positioning of her facial muscles. Other actresses found this vanity exhausting. Dietrich called it professionalism, but the discipline went deeper than beauty maintenance. For her roles in films like Shanghai Express and The Blue Angel, Dietrich researched every physical aspect of her characters' lives. If her character was a cabaret singer, Dietrich studied how professional performers held themselves differently than amateurs. If she played a woman of mystery, she practiced the art of revealing nothing through gesture, the angle of a raised cigarette, the precise speed of turning her head, the calculated laziness in her gaze. Her preparation rituals became legendary. Dietrich would rehearse walking into a room 20 times to find the exact rhythm that communicated her character's confidence. She practiced lifting a champagne glass until the movement looked effortless but significant. Directors learned that Dietrich's scenes took longer to shoot not because she was difficult, but because she wouldn't settle. Every gesture had to serve the character. Every expression had to be repeatable with mechanical precision. This approach created a screen presence unlike anyone else in classic Hollywood. Dietrich never looked spontaneous or caught off guard. She looked sculpted, mythic, deliberately crafted. Critics called her cold. Dietrich called herself an artist. The truth was both. She discovered that becoming iconic meant controlling every variable, mastering every detail, and refusing to let a single imperfect frame define her legacy. Discipline bordering on obsession created a legend that still hypnotizes audiences decades later. Laurence Olivier versus Dustin Hoffman, the legendary put down. The clash between classical craft and modern method acting reached its perfect flashpoint on the set of Marathon Man in 1976. Dustin Hoffman, committed to his role as the exhausted, paranoid Babe Levy, deliberately stayed awake for days before filming an especially grueling sequence. When he arrived on set with genuine insomnia radiating from his bloodshot eyes and trembling hands, co-star Laurence Olivier delivered one of Hollywood's most famous lines. "My dear boy, why don't you just try acting?" This wasn't just a quip, it was a generational divide made verbal. Olivier represented the old guard, trained in British theater, believing that technical skill and imagination were sufficient. You didn't need to actually suffer to portray suffering. You studied it, understood it, and reproduced it through craft. Hoffman represented the new American method, convinced that authentic emotion required authentic experience. If your character hasn't slept, then you shouldn't sleep. Simple. The tension had been building throughout production. Hoffman would arrive disheveled, clammy-handed, genuinely unsettled by his preparation. For the notorious dental torture scene with Olivier's character, Hoffman pushed himself into such a ragged state that his micro-tremors from exhaustion weren't performed. They were real. He believed this honesty would translate on screen, creating visceral reactions from audiences. And he was right. But Olivier's comment, though delivered with friendly humor according to Hoffman's later clarifications, crystallized a debate that still rages in acting schools. Was Hoffman's insomnia a genuine tool, or merely suffering for suffering's sake? Did it enhance the performance, or was it indulgent? Could Olivier, using only technique and imagination, have achieved the same result without the physical toll? The fluorescent hum of that dental office scene suggests Hoffman's approach worked. Audiences felt his terror because it was partially real. The story became shorthand for method excess in Hollywood gossip, sometimes oversimplifying both approaches. The truth is more nuanced. Olivier respected Hoffman's work even as he questioned the necessity. Hoffman admired Olivier's craft, while believing his own preparation gave him something technique alone couldn't access. Both were right. Both were legends. And the myth of their exchange grew larger than either man, becoming a behind-the-scenes story that defined the evolution of acting itself. the moment when classic Hollywood's elegance met the new generation's insane dedication to realism. Robert De Niro, the chameleon. Robert De Niro didn't just transform for roles. He disappeared into them so completely that the person underneath became irrelevant. His preparation rituals are now Hollywood legend, but when he started, they were considered borderline insane. For Taxi Driver in 1976, De Niro actually obtained a New York City hack license and drove 12-hour shifts, experiencing the anonymous isolation of Travis Bickle firsthand. Passengers had no idea the man behind the wheel was an actor researching a role. They just saw another cabbie, another invisible person in the city that never looks back. De Niro understood that Travis's alienation came from being unseen, so he made himself invisible. The meter clicking, vinyl seats sticky with summer heat at 3 a.m., the silence between passengers, the way the city looks through a windshield at dawn. These weren't details from imagination. They were lived experience. Between rehearsals, De Niro would slip back into a cab to maintain the rhythm, the mental state, the particular brand of loneliness that makes someone dangerous. But Raging Bull in 1980 took his dedication to shocking extremes. To play boxer Jake LaMotta across several decades, De Niro trained like a prize fighter for the early scenes, learning the sport so thoroughly he could have competed in amateur matches. The sound of jump rope against gymnasium floors, the rhythm of heavy bag work, the particular breathing that comes from fighting shape, all authentic. Then production paused for 4 months while De Niro gained approximately 60 pounds to play the older, self-destructive LaMotta. The physical transformation was staggering. De Niro's face thickened, his movements became heavier, even his voice changed with the added weight and its effect on his breathing. When filming resumed, crew members were shocked by the late-life scene's authenticity. This wasn't padding or makeup. This was an actor who changed his body so completely that walking, sitting, and breathing were different. The toll on his health became part of the performance's legend. De Niro's face thickened, his movements became heavier, even his voice changed with the added weight and its effect on his breathing. When filming resumed, crew members were shocked by the late-life scene's authenticity. This wasn't padding or makeup. This was an actor who changed his body so completely that walking, sitting, and breathing were different. The toll on his health became part of the performance's legend, a benchmark for commitment that other actors measured themselves against. De Niro won the Academy Award for Raging Bull, but more importantly, he established a new standard for what taking the role seriously meant. Method acting became synonymous with his name. Directors knew that hiring De Niro meant accepting months of preparation, total immersion, and results that couldn't be achieved through craft alone. He'd shown Hollywood that becoming the character, actually becoming them, not just playing them, created iconic performances that defined cinema. The chameleon didn't just change colors. He changed species. Elizabeth Taylor, living the drama on and off screen. Elizabeth Taylor never drew a clear line between her life and her roles, and maybe that was her secret. While other actors went home after work, Taylor carried her characters into her relationships, her marriages, her public persona. For Cleopatra, she didn't just study the Egyptian queen's mannerisms for months. She embodied Cleopatra's commanding presence, her romantic intensity, her belief that she was entitled to everything she desired. The result was a performance that felt less like acting and more like Taylor simply being her most dramatic self. The preparation for historical roles became legendary. When playing queens, socialites, or women of power, Taylor researched not just for authenticity, but for incorporation. She studied how royalty moved through space, how they commanded rooms without raising their voices, how their confidence came from believing they were inherently superior. Then she brought those qualities into her actual life, blurring the boundaries until even she might not have known which gestures belonged to Elizabeth and which to her character. This approach created magic on screen, but chaos behind the scenes. During Cleopatra's troubled production, Taylor's affair with Richard Burton wasn't separate from her portrayal of the legendary seductress. It was an extension of it. She was living the role, experiencing the same dangerous passion that defined Cleopatra's relationship with Mark Antony. The scandal that erupted worldwide only intensified Taylor's commitment to understanding a woman who let love destroy empires. For Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Taylor gained weight and aged herself down to portray Martha, a bitter, alcoholic woman trapped in a toxic marriage. But the performance drew on Taylor's own experiences with failed relationships, public scrutiny, and the exhaustion of maintaining an image. She channeled real pain into Martha's cruelty, real vulnerability into her desperate need for connection. Co-star Burton, her real-life husband at the time, brought their actual marital tensions to George and Martha's warfare, creating scenes so authentic that crew members felt uncomfortable watching. Taylor's genius was making every character feel like a lived experience rather than a studied role. She taught Hollywood that some actors don't perform emotion, they actually experience it, right there on camera, in front of everyone. The toll on her personal life, her marriages, her health became inseparable from her legend. Elizabeth Taylor didn't act. She lived dramatically, and cameras were lucky enough to capture it. Katharine Hepburn, the relentless perfectionist. Katharine Hepburn approached acting with an athlete's discipline and a scholar's precision on every set. From her early screwball comedies to her later dramatic roles, Hepburn rehearsed lines until exhaustion, learned new skills for authenticity, and refused to accept anything less than absolute excellence from herself. If a role required tennis skills, she trained until she could play legitimately. If it demanded horseback riding, she rode until she could gallop. Hepburn's drive and control became legendary. This was a woman who believed perfection was achievable if you were willing to work harder than everyone else. For Morning Glory, her first Academy Award-winning role, Hepburn studied young actresses consumed by ambition. She examined their walk, their nervous energy, the way desperation disguised itself as confidence. Then she rehearsed every scene multiple times, trying different emotional approaches until she found the exact balance of vulnerability and determination. Directors learned that Hepburn came prepared with choices, and she expected everyone else to match her preparation. The physical roles showcased her most extreme dedication. In The Philadelphia Story, Hepburn performed complex physical comedy with balletic precision, rehearsing pratfalls and comic timing until every moment looked spontaneous but felt controlled. For The African Queen with Humphrey Bogart, she endured genuine jungle conditions, heat, insects, contaminated water without complaint, believing that suffering through authentic locations made the performance more honest. Hepburn's independence was part of her method. She refused studio demands that softened her characters or made them more conventionally feminine. When told to be more likable, she doubled down on intelligence and strength. When directors suggested she smile more, she reminded them that smart women don't perform for approval. This stubbornness extended to her craft. Hepburn played characters the way she believed they should be played, regardless of public opinion or box office concerns. The endurance required for her approach showed in her longevity. Across 6 decades, Hepburn delivered performances that never coasted on charm or beauty. She remained sharp, prepared, relentless. Co-stars like Spencer Tracy marveled at her stamina and commitment, even as they teased her for overthinking scenes. But Hepburn understood something crucial about classic Hollywood. Talent fades, beauty ages, but craft endures. Her perfectionism built a career that outlasted every trend, creating a legacy of grit and excellence that modern actors still aspire to match. Charlton Heston, epic dedication. Charlton Heston belonged to an era when actors did their own stunts, endured genuine hardship, and made biblical epics feel mythically real. For Ben-Hur in 1959, Heston didn't just learn to drive a chariot. He trained for months until he could handle the team of 4 horses racing at dangerous speeds. The result was one of cinema's most famous action sequences, made legendary by the knowledge that Heston was actually there, actually risking injury, actually performing the turns that audiences gasped at. The preparation was grueling by design. Heston spent weeks before filming working with horses, learning their temperaments, understanding how to communicate through reins and voice. When the chariot race began shooting, with cameras mounted on moving vehicles and other drivers racing inches away, Heston's knuckles were genuinely white, his concentration absolutely real. The desert heat, the dehydration, the physical toll of controlling animals in competition. These weren't acted, they were endured. For the 10 Commandments, director Cecil B. DeMille demanded authentic desert locations, which meant Heston as Moses spent long days under brutal Egyptian sun. The heat was staggering, sometimes reaching 120 degrees. Crew members saw Heston refuse special treatment, believing that Moses had suffered in the wilderness, and therefore so should he. The famous scene of Moses descending from Mount Sinai wasn't filmed on a comfortable soundstage. It was shot on location with Heston carrying stone tablets up and down steep terrain repeatedly. The This old-school toughness defined Heston's approach to acting. He believed physical authenticity created performances that couldn't be faked with close-ups and clever editing. When he played the title role in ELCD, Heston learned medieval swordsmanship and rode horses in full armor under the Spanish sun. When he portrayed astronaut George Taylor in Planet of the Apes, he insisted on performing his own stunts despite the costume limitations and difficult locations. Heston represented a particular strain of classic Hollywood masculinity, the actor as endurance athlete, willing to push through pain for authentic spectacle. His performances had mythic scale because they were grounded in genuine physical achievement. Modern audiences watching Ben-Hur still feel the dangerous reality of that chariot race. They sense that Heston earned every moment through sweat and risk. In an industry increasingly reliant on special effects and safety protocols, Heston's epic dedication remained a reminder of when movies demanded everything and actors delivered. Grace Kelly, royal precision before the crown. Grace Kelly brought a deceptive elegance to her preparation. She looked effortless on screen, but the work behind that grace was meticulous to the point of obsession. Before becoming actual royalty as Princess of Monaco, Kelly studied etiquette, posture, and mannerisms with scholarly dedication. Every gesture was practiced until it became second nature. Every expression was calibrated to communicate exactly what her character needed to reveal and nothing more. Beneath the cool blonde beauty was a calculating perfectionist who left nothing to chance. For the country girl in 1954, Kelly shocked directors with her transformation. Known for playing sophisticated, composed women, she completely dismantled her image to portray the dowdy, bitter wife of an alcoholic actor. The role required Kelly to study how disappointment changes posture, how resentment shows in the corners of the mouth, how women who've given up on themselves move through space differently than those still fighting. She rehearsed scenes obsessively, determined to prove she was more than a beautiful face. The preparation paid off an Academy Award, but more importantly, it revealed Kelly's true method. She approached each character as a complete system of physical and psychological details that had to be mastered individually before they could be integrated. For Rear Window with Hitchcock, Kelly studied how wealthy, confident women entered rooms, the assumption of welcome, the casual ownership of space, the way they expected men to accommodate them. Then she brought that entitled grace to Lisa Fremont, making the character feel born into her sophistication rather than performing it. Her famous partnership with Hitchcock showcased this precision. In T.O. Catch a Thief, Kelly played an heiress who was both innocent and seductive, requiring delicate calibration of contradictory qualities. She practiced the beach scene flirtation dozens of times, finding the exact balance between playfulness and sexual awareness that made the moment iconic. Hitchcock later said Kelly understood better than any actress he'd worked with that cinema was about control. Controlling your face, your body, your emotional expression to serve the camera's needs. When Kelly retired from acting to become Princess Grace, some saw it as abandoning her craft. But those who'd worked with her understood she'd been preparing for royalty her entire career. The studied elegance, the perfected posture, the ability to command attention through minimal gesture. These weren't just acting techniques. They were life skills Kelly had mastered through obsessive preparation. She transformed from Philadelphia debutante to Oscar-winning actress to actual princess using the same method, relentless attention to detail, practiced until performance became reality. Peter O'Toole, The Desert Mirage. Peter O'Toole's preparation for Lawrence of Arabia in 1962 wasn't just method acting. It was romantic obsession with becoming a legend. Director David Lean needed an actor who could convince audiences that T. Lawrence genuinely belonged in the Arabian desert, and O'Toole committed to that authenticity with near-delirious dedication. He learned desert riding for real, logging punishing hours on camelback until the saddle became an extension of his body, until he moved with the animal's rhythm rather than against it. The physical toll was immediate and brutal. Camels aren't horses. They're taller. Their gait is different. The saddle positioning creates unique friction points. O'Toole fell repeatedly during early training, earning bruises and friction burns. His solution wasn't to fake the seat with camera tricks, but to have the costume team pad him with sponge rubber, then continue riding until his posture, his balance, and his entire bearing the saddle looked like a man who'd actually crossed dunes. The leather creaked, the camel's groaning complaints, the sand cutting his face in wind. These became O'Toole's daily reality. But the preparation went deeper than physical skill. O'Toole studied Lawrence's writings, his complex psychology, the contradiction of an Englishman becoming more Arab than the Arabs while never fully belonging to either culture. He practiced Lawrence's affected mannerisms, the precise way he'd adjust his robes, the theatrical quality to his movements that suggested a man always performing for an invisible audience. Between takes in the Jordanian desert, O'Toole would stay in character, maintaining Lawrence's bearing even when cameras weren't rolling. The injuries accumulated throughout the brutal 7-month shoot. Heat shimmer distorted everything. Sand got into wounds, clothing, equipment. O'Toole pushed through cracked lips, sun-damaged skin, and exhaustion that made some scenes feel genuinely hallucinogenic. When Lawrence descends into near madness after the massacre at Tafis, O'Toole didn't have to reach far. He'd spent so long under that merciless sun, so deep in character that the line between actor and role had already blurred. The result was a performance that feels sun-etched rather than soundstage lit. O'Toole's Lawrence moves through that desert landscape like he belongs there, like he's been transformed by it. The charisma looks earned through suffering rather than manufactured through technique. Modern audiences watching Lawrence of Arabia still sense the authenticity. This was an actor who lived in Lawrence's robes, rode his camels, survived his desert. O'Toole's obsession with craft created a mirage that felt more real than reality. Kirk Douglas, the face of fury. Kirk Douglas embodied a particular brand of intensity that defined classic Hollywood masculinity. Controlled fury, simmering always just beneath a charming surface. On sets for Spartacus and Champion, Douglas maintained his character's emotional temperature for days at a time, refusing to let the rage and determination cool between takes. Directors learned that working with Douglas meant managing a constant simmer, an actor who kept himself at performance pitch through sheer force of will. For Champion in 1949, playing the ruthless boxer Midge Kelly, Douglas prepared by studying men consumed by ambition's darker side. He examined how single-minded pursuit of success creates a particular body language. The aggressive forward lean, the jaw permanently clenched, the eyes at calculated advantage in every interaction. Then he locked into that state and maintained it throughout filming. Between scenes, Douglas didn't relax into friendly conversation. He stayed tight, coiled, dangerous. The famous training sequences weren't just choreographed boxing. Douglas actually trained like a fighter, building the physical vocabulary of a man whose body was his weapon. He learned how boxers move when the camera wasn't watching, how they carried tension in their shoulders, how violence shaped their resting face. When Midge Kelly destroyed relationships and betrayed everyone who helped him, Douglas played it with such authentic ruthlessness that audiences genuinely hated the character, testament to his refusal to soften the edges or ask for sympathy. Spartacus in 1960 required different intensity, but equal commitment. Douglas, also producing the film, stayed in character as a rebellious slave throughout the lengthy production. The physical demands were enormous: fight choreography, horsework, crowd scenes in the Italian heat. But Douglas understood that Spartacus's fury came from somewhere elemental, a rage against injustice that couldn't be performed casually. He accessed and maintained that anger, giving the slave revolt scenes an authentic desperation. Co-stars reported that Douglas's intensity could be exhausting to work alongside. He demanded that everyone match his energy, his commitment, his refusal to coast. When the famous "I Am Spartacus" scene was filmed, with dozens of extras standing to claim the identity, Douglas's performance of watching his rebellion succeed carried weight because he'd spent months inhabiting the role's revolutionary anger. That face, the clenched jaw, the furious eyes, the barely controlled violence, became synonymous with a certain era of American cinema when heroes were complicated, dangerous, and undeniably powerful. Kirk Douglas taught Hollywood that some roles required constant intensity, and that maintaining that emotional pitch separated stars from legends. They weren't just pretending, they were transforming. What you witnessed are 14 stories that reveal a truth about classic Hollywood's greatest actors. They understood that memorable performances required sacrificing something. Maybe it was comfort, maybe it was health, maybe it was the ability to simply turn off and be themselves again. But in exchange for that sacrifice, they created moments of cinema that still captivate audiences decades later. These weren't just actors hitting their marks and collecting paychecks. These were artists willing to risk everything for truth. The old studios called it method acting, but that label feels insufficient for what Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, Vivien Leigh, and their contemporaries were doing. This was deeper than technique. This was identity dissolution, psychological deep diving. physical transformation that bordered on self-destruction. When Robert De Niro gained 60 pounds or Peter O'Toole rode camels until his body broke, they were following an ancient artistic tradition. The belief that great art demands great suffering, that authenticity cannot be faked, only earned. Behind the scenes of classic Hollywood's most iconic performances lies a consistent pattern: isolation, obsession, dangerous dedication to craft. James Dean pacing alone between takes, refusing connection. Bette Davis deliberately making herself grotesque. Elizabeth Taylor living her roles so completely that life and performance became indistinguishable. These actors built a mythology of what it means to be serious about acting, establishing standards that modern performers still measure themselves against. But there's a question these stories raise, one worth considering as we close. Where's the line between dedication and self-harm? When does commitment to craft become dangerous obsession? The actors in this video paid prices we've only glimpsed: exhaustion, injuries, psychological strain that lingered long after filming ended. Some might argue they went too far. Others will say they went exactly far enough to create performances that transcended their era and became timeless. What's undeniable is this: their insane dedication created the standards that define great acting. When we watch modern actors disappear into roles, when we praise transformative performances, we're celebrating a tradition these classic Hollywood legends established, sometimes at great personal cost. They showed us that the hunger to be remembered, to leave something genuine and lasting on film, might be the truest role any actor can play. And in that hunger, in that willingness to give everything for a few minutes of authentic emotion captured on camera, we glimpse what makes someone not just an actor, but a legend. The cameras stopped rolling decades ago, but these performances, earned through genuine suffering, shocking transformation, and dedication that bordered on madness, will continue burning through the screen forever.